Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Sheviis, chapter 8, Halacha 7, and we know that with Sheviis, you're not allowed to destroy Sheviis produce. Now, we're going to get into some other issues about destroying produce. By the way, if you're following along in the Art Scroll, we're on 67A2. So, how is this going to fit in with destroying produce? What else is going to be where you have an issue about destroying produce? Well, we know that Terumah has an issue, and so does offerings. Offerings have a timeline which you cannot pass, and you're not allowed to intentionally do something that's going to disqualify and destroy an offering, or disqualify it so that, let it go past its amount of time that it can be eaten or wasted. You're not allowed to waste holy food. And that's one of the issues with Sheviis. You're not allowed to destroy it because it has sanctity. But what about other issues, other things that are going to have sanctity? So the Mishnah says one may not cook Sheviis vegetables in Terumah oil so that he not expose them to possible disqualification. This, by the way, is anonymously said. Now there's going to be another Mishnah over in Zevachim. You can find this, by the way, over in Bavli in 76a. And there's going to be an issue between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Meir. Now we know that as a rule, when a Mishnah is said anonymously, it's going to be Rabbi Meir. So over here it says, one may not cook Sheviis vegetables in Terumah oil so that he may not expose them to possible disqualification, but Rabbi Shimon permits this. So over here, we know that, Terumah that becomes tamei has to be burned, okay? That's just the way it is. So even a Kohen who may eat Terumah may not cook the vegetables with Sheviis sanctity in the oil of the Terumah. And what this is saying is because the Terumah might become tamei, and this would cause the entire dish, including the Sheviis vegetables, to become burned. And the thing is that they have to be treated with the same stringency as Terumah. And when you cook it in the Sheviis vegetables in the Terumah oil, if you violate the rules of Terumah and it make it tamei, now the Sheviis produce has to be burned. Well, you're not allowed to go burn the Sheviis produce. So now you have two problems here. Now over here in this cooking of the oil of the Sheviis vegetables in the oil, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is not worried with the possibility of eventual destruction, and he's going to forbid only the actual destruction of the Sheviis produce. Now, again, this is coming up over in Zevachim 76a, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is holding over there that you're allowed to expose Kodashim to the mere possibility of invalidation. For instance, you may cause a reduction of the time allotted for consuming sacrifices, and even though this might cause it to become disqualified prematurely, one may cause a reduction of the time. So the issue here is going to be about potentiality. Is it going to have the potentiality to become disqualified or not? That's what the issue is going to be. And this is one way to see this. In other words, when you cook the Sheviis vegetables in Terumah oil so that one may not do it, so that he may not expose them to possible disqualification, the worry that Rabbi Meir has is that, well, somebody can touch this Sheviis produce. It has the qualities and characteristics of Terumah now, and you've made it become tamei. Now you have to destroy the Sheviis produce. And so the issue is going to be this potentiality that it could become invalidated and destroyed. And Shimon Bar Yochai is not saying that. Shimon Bar Yochai is, and by the way, The Tanna Kama is also, as the Marafulda is going to be pointing out, the Tanna Kama is going to forbid cooking Sheviis vegetables with Terumah oil out of concern that the Terumah may cause the Sheviis to be burned. In other words, that's the deeper point. And there are other people like Rashi in the commentary in Zevachim, so on the other side over there, who's understanding this, that the Tanna Kama is going to forbid for different reasons. It's actually going to be opposite. And the concern is that the Sheviis might cause the Terumah to become disqualified. And so the idea is that the Terumah oil has absorbed the flavor of the Sheviis vegetable, and when the time for the Beur has come, then the Terumah cannot be eaten anymore. So you end up where they're both true, right? So that the Terumah can get the characteristics where it can attain Beur, and over there, the Sheviis vegetables can get the characteristics of the Terumah. It can get intermingled. So the Mishnah is going to give a basic rule that, by the way, we mentioned in 7.1, where what happens when you have items that get exchanged for produce. Okay, so let's say you have a bottle of non-Sheviis wine and you're going to trade it with the butcher for some meat. I'm sorry. You have a bottle of non-Sheviis wine and you're going to trade it with the guy at the shuk for some Sheviis dates. Now, the Sheviis dates have Sheviis sanctity and the wine does not. But once you make that exchange, now the restrictions on both will be there. So now the wine will have Sheviis sanctity, even though it didn't before, and the dates will still have Sheviis sanctity. And in the case of you trading dates for meat, let's say your dates are going to have Sheviis sanctity, and you go to the butcher and you trade them for a piece of meat, then it's going to be where the dates that have Sheviis sanctity are going to be traded over to the meat which does not have Sheviis sanctity, and once the trade happens, then the meat's going to attain Sheviis sanctity. So in both cases, one where you're trading with somebody where you're trading something that does not have Sheviis sanctity for something that does have Sheviis sanctity, or the opposite, where you're trading something that does have Sheviis sanctity for something that does not have Sheviis sanctity, in both cases, it's going to get the restrictions and Sheviis sanctity. So the Mishnah says that the very last object of exchange is subject to Sheviis sanctity, but the produce itself remains prohibited. So again, this is going to be where what's going to happen, where you're going to trade Sheviis meat for, regular meat for like Sheviis dates. Well, this sanctity is going to get transferred onto the meat because of the exchange. That's how you got it. You got it with Sheviis. So now it's going to have issues with Kedusha, and very fitting because now you might have Sheviis meat and you might have a Goan, and what's he going to do with cooking the meat, the Sheviis meat now in Terumah oil? So the questions are going to come up there as well. So these are connected, and they're both transfers in a way, right? You've transferred when you've made this exchange, and likewise, cooking the Sheviis vegetables in the Terumah oil, you've also made a transfer where the properties of the oil now gets Sheviis things because you might have flavored the oil, and now you might have flavored the vegetables with the oil as well. So then the oils will get the characteristics of both Terumah and also with Sheviis, and also get the restrictions. So now the Terumah products can have and be subject to Beur, and also the Terumah product now has the characteristic on top of the Sheviis product, so that now the Sheviis product can, if it becomes tamei, has to be destroyed, but you have this problem where you can't destroy it. So the Gemara now is going to present this disagreement that's going to be very similar to here with the Tanaim. So we learned in this Mishnah, this is going to be in Zevachim 10.7, and that's going to be 90b in the Bavli. And it's going to say, regarding all of them, the offerings that are eaten, the Kohanim may vary the manner of their consumption. And the idea here from the Bavli, by the way, Mara Fulda is pointing this out, that they may eat the offerings in whatever way they wish. And the law derived from the verse in Numbers 18:8 is going to state regarding the portion of an offering that a Kohen eats. It says in this pasuk, it says, "I've given it to you for greatness." And this term for greatness means that it is eaten in the manner that kings eat it. And basically what this is implying, that kings can eat it in whatever way they want. And without this verse, we would have thought that Kohanim have to eat the offering only to fulfill the mitzvah. The deeper point here is that, it would look like they have to eat it, but not necessarily get enjoyment from it. In other words, you would say that, well, the Kohen, they just have to come and they just have to eat the offering, and that's it. That, that's how you fulfill it. And there's no other connection with enjoyment. And you wouldn't know that without this pasuk. In other words, that you're going to be able to eat this any way you want. That means that if you want to spice it, if you want to boil it, if you want to roast it, okay, because it's going to be more enjoyable, that's going to be part of the mitzvah. It's not just that you ate it, okay, that you get enjoyment out of it. So the Gemara says that the Kohanim may vary the manner of their consumption to eat them roasted, overcooked, or cooked, and to add to them spices of chulin or spices of Terumah. Now, there's not really going to be an issue if you add spices of chulin, because let's say you have Kodashim, right? And with Kodashim, there's always a timeline on when it will become pasul, when it will become no longer valid. And it's very serious. You really, really have to eat the Kodashim before this timeline lapses. Now, it's different for every one of the different korbanos. And if you have an issue where you're putting the spices of chulin on it, you don't get this intermingling. You see, we were talking about, well, you have the characteristics of one going to another. And so you have special characteristics in the Kodashim. And so, you have this timeline on which you have to eat it. Now, in terms of Terumah, you don't have a timeline that you have to eat it by. So, by the way, in Beur, you do have a timeline you have to eat it by. So it's very similar. So with Beur, once it leaves the field, you have to put it out and you can no longer eat it. But in terms of spices of Terumah, if your spices of Terumah are 2 years old, there's no problem with it. But once you put it onto that meat, you're going to have an issue, because now these spices of Terumah are going to get the characteristics of the Kodashim. These spices of Terumah, they're going to go into the meat and they're going to seep in and they're going to flavor the meat, and they're going to get into the cracks and crannies and they're going to get all over the place. And now you're not allowed to waste the Terumah. You're not allowed to waste the korbanos. And if it's going to become tameh, then you have an issue. And you're not allowed to destroy the Kodashim. You're not allowed to. I mean, you have a lot of issues, because you also have an issue that when the meat goes over the timeline, that you've invalidated the Terumah and you have to destroy it. But in terms of destroying Terumah gets destroyed because it became tameh, not because it overwent a timeline. You see the point there? That's the deeper point. When you rub these spices of Terumah into this meat, now what happens is you've gotten these characteristics of the korbanos into it, so that now if it goes too long, now you have to destroy the Terumah. You're not allowed to. So it's very similar to this Mishnah. So Rabbi Meir says one may not add to them the spices of the Terumah, so that he not expose the Terumah to disqualification. And this, again, is going to be the issue, that if you're putting on the Terumah, or, by the way, any sanctified substance, and you're doing it in a situation where it's going to increase this potential to get disqualified, Rabbi Meir is not going to not allow it. And that's why he's forbidding the using of the Terumah spices to season this offering, because the spices are going to cause the taste to go into the meat. And then if the meat becomes disqualified, you have to go and you have to destroy the Terumah spices, and the Terumah spices get disqualified. And so that's why everybody agrees that you can go and you can use these non-consecrated spices of hulin to go and season the meat, but not the Terumah ones, because the hulin does not have this restriction. So the Gemara now is going to look at this disagreement between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Meir in this Mishnah, the one that's over here in Sheviis chapter 8, Halacha 7, and over there in Zevachim in 10.7. And the Gemara is going to accept that these two disagreements are actually going to be identical. In other words, isn't it a case where Rabbi Meir over here and over there are saying the same thing, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is effectively saying the same thing in both places? So it emerges that the opinion recording anonymously here is the same as the opinion ascribed to the individual there. In other words, the Mishnah here is anonymous, and that's going to be forbidding someone to expose Sheviis to this possibility of disqualification. And over there in Zevachim, it actually writes down that this opinion is going to be the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And so basically this is saying that isn't this and that over there the same? And over here, this Mishnah is going to attribute the opinion, the opposite opinion, that we don't need to be worried with the mere possibility of disqualification of Rabbi Shimon. But in Zevachim, this is going to be the anonymously recorded opinion. And one of the important things to do is to try to take these seemingly contradictory Mishnahs and try to figure out what's going on with them, because it's not accidental and it's trying to teach us something. And one of the jobs of the Torah scholar is to understand these seemingly contradictory Mishnahs and try to understand the nuance of them and work them out. That's our job. So I want to talk about this. Normally, a Mishnah is going to talk about a disagreement between an anonymous opinion, and it's going to give it and when it makes another opinion and gives it to an individual, we're going to rule in accordance with the opinion anonymously. But over here in this situation, we have the conflicting opinions, and the conflicting opinions are both recorded anonymously. So over here, the opinion of Rabbi Meir and the opinion of Rabbi Meir over there is the same, except over here it's anonymous, and over there it's not anonymous. And the opinion of Rabbi Shimon is anonymous over there, but over here it's going to be not anonymous over here. It's going to be cited as the individual over here. In other words, Rabbi Shimon has this same opinion over there in the Mishnah, or so it looks, but we see this issue. So how could it be that you have the two contradictory opinions being anonymous, one over here and one over there? So the Gemara is going to explain it. It's going to say, therefore, it says Ella. So we must say that since the anonymous opinion of the Mishnah here is the opinion of Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah over there, and the anonymous opinion of the Mishnah there is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah here, we have to go to this general rule about disagreements between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon. And the rule is that, says this Gemara, in a dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon. So we should say here that the halacha would also follow Rabbi Shimon, who is not concerned about the mere disqualification. And the Gemara, though, is going to conclude. Rabbi Yosei said, I asked those of the household of Rabbi Yanai what their practice was, and they said, we conducted ourselves as follows. We would cook Sheviis vegetables in Terumah oil only a little at a time and would eat them immediately. And the Gemara is going to explain the statement. It's going to say, what now does he mean to say with this? And the Gemara answers and says that the halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Meir cited over there in Zevachim, which is presented as the opinion of the rabbis here. So, just want to explain this. So, the Mara Fulda says about this: in order to avoid the possibility that the vegetables become tamei after being cooked with the Terumah oil, it would, which by the way would cause a problem where they would have to become burned, because now these Sheviis vegetables got the characteristics of the Terumah. And so now if the Sheviis produce gets tamei, you have to destroy it. Big problem. So the idea here is that in this opinion, it's really reflecting. Rabbi Yanai, by the way, is the teacher of Rabbi Yochanan. And so what this is really saying is that, according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it is certainly not necessary to cook the vegetables only a little at a time, because Rabbi Shimon is not concerned with this possibility of disqualification. So the household of Rabbi Yanai, who is going to be the teacher of Rabbi Yochanan, must have been following a ruling that the halacha goes with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and that Rabbi Meir agrees with the one that one is permitted to cook a small amount and eat it right away. And the Vilna Goan says about this that Rabbi Meir concedes that this is permitted since it is very unlikely to become tamei in such a short time. And the Chazan Ish, in his commentary in 1414 in his Beur, says, in any event, the ruling followed the opinion of Rabbi Meir because it was presented in the Mishnah here as the majority opinion. So that's going to be the issue. In other words, when it's anonymously spoken here, it's the anonymous opinion. This anonymous opinion happens to be Rabbi Meir. And over here, it's going to be where the individual is going to be Rabbi Shimon. So normally in a case where it's going to be Rabbi Meir versus Rabbi Shimon, the halacha is going to go by Rabbi Shimon. But over here, it's presented anonymously. So really the question is, why should it be that the halacha would even follow Rabbi Meir just because his opinion was presented here as the majority, but you have this conflicting opinion of Rabbi Shimon that's presented as the majority opinion in Zevachim. So again, over there, the situation is exactly reversed. And over there in Zevachim, the majority opinion is Rabbi Shimon. It's not Rabbi Meir. So what's going on that's going to make this Mishnah different than that Mishnah over there? And the Maraful is going to answer that. And he's going to say that in Zevachim 8.3, it's going to be 75 in the Bavli. There is a third Mishnah which mentions this disagreement. And in that Mishnah, Rabbi Meir's opinion is presented as the majority of opinion of the rabbis. In other words, it's the Tanna Kama. And since, says the Mara Fulda, that there are two Mishnahs that present Rabbi Meir's opinion as a majority opinion of the rabbis, the Tanna Kama, and only one Mishnah that presents Rabbi Shimon's opinion that way, we follow the opinion of Rabbi Meir. So evidently on different occasions there were different majorities, and presumably the opinion which was the majority more often and had more adherents than the other opinion. So that's going to be another way to look at it. So the Mishnah now moves on to this other topic. And the Mishnah stated that the very last object of exchange is subject to Sheviis sanctity, but the produce itself remains prohibited. And again, we're talking about a case where you go to the shuk to barter and you have either non-Sheviis produce that you're trading for Sheviis produce, or you have Sheviis produce that you're trading for non-Sheviis produce. In both cases, you're gonna get where both products are gonna have Sheviis sanctity, even though one of them did not. And also, whatever restrictions that you had on one of them is going to go on to the other. So, for instance, if I have grapes of Sheviis and I'm trading it for meat of Sheviis, now the meat has no Beur, but the grapes do have a Beur. The grapes do have a deadline where they'll no longer be in the field. You have to put them out, and it's no longer available. So if I make a trade for these grapes of Sheviis for this meat, now the meat is going to have this characteristic of Beur, and because it was on grapes, when the grapes go out of the season, I will also have to put out my meat. In other words, it will also have the characteristics of Beur with all the restrictions of the grapes, including when it has to go out and be put out to the field. So the Gemara is going to explain this more in detail, and the Gemara is going to say, how is this illustrated? And it says, if one purchased meat with Sheviis produce, both the meat and the Sheviis produce are subject to the law of Beur in the 7th year. In other words, that your grapes or your cucumbers that you traded over for your meat, when these cucumbers or grapes leave the field, your meat now has a characteristic of the Beur, and it also has to leave the field as well. So that's a surprising chiddush for many people, but that's what the law is. It takes on both of the restrictions. So in the case of you trading non-Sheviis meat is not Sheviis, and you're trading it for these Sheviis cucumbers, now whatever restrictions on these cucumbers are going to go onto this meat. And now it's going to talk about the next step in this transaction. It says, if he then purchased fish with the meat, in other words, you went and you made a third transaction. You traded these Sheviis cucumbers for the meat. Now it's going to have these restrictions of the cucumbers onto this meat. And now you're going to trade this Sheviis meat now for fish. So the Gemara says that the meat leaves its state of sanctity and the fish is subject to Sheviis sanctity in its place. And if he then purchased oil with the fish, now he's doing a fourth transaction, the fish leaves its state of sanctity and the oil enters into its place. Thus, the very last item in the exchange is subject to Sheviis sanctity, while the original Sheviis produce always remains prohibited. So that's going to be a chiddush. And the question is, how is that going to happen? Is that going to happen because it was a sale? Or is that going to happen because it was an act of deconsecration? And the Baraisa is going to explain this idea of transference of Sheviis sanctity, and the Gemara is going to ask whether there's another way to transfer Sheviis sanctity. Exactly how is this mechanism working? And the Gemara says they asked of Rabbi Yochanan, what is the law regarding whether Sheviis sanctity can depart by way of deconsecration? And his response was, why not? So what is an act of deconsecration? Mara Fools is going to explain it like this. He's going to say, can a person transfer the Sheviis sanctity of one object onto another object that he owns by simply stating that it should be deconsecrated onto that second object? Now, we know this with Meiser Sheni coins, and we know this where you have Beurim coins, where you're saying, okay, I've taken off the sanctity off of this food product and I put it onto these coins. Fine. Now, what about what's going on here? What if you're saying, okay, I have this meat and I have this fish, and this meat has Sheviis sanctity and this fish doesn't? Can it be where I deconsecrate the meat and I transfer it onto the fish? That's what it's saying. Now, what it was talking about before was saying, okay, I've traded or I purchased the fish with the meat. Okay, that's a transaction. This deconsecration is a little bit different. This is going to work more like, you're way up in the north and you want to deconsecrate Meiser Sheni produce onto the coins so that you can easily transport them to Jerusalem and use them in Jerusalem. So there's a conflicting opinion. Rabbi Lazar says that Sheviis sanctity does not depart by way of deconsecration. Rather, it departs only by a sale. So this is going to be very close to the Yovel. So where you have a case where, in that law of the Yovel, that Yovel and Sheviis sanctity can be redeemed. And the Torah says, when you shall make a sale. This, by the way, is in Leviticus, Vayikra 25:14. Rabbi Lazar is deriving from the juxtaposition of these verses that the Yovel and Sheviis sanctity can be transferred only through a sale, but not through deconsecration. So, as it says there in the Torah, when you shall make a sale. And the idea is that over there, in Yovel, it's when you make a sale. And because Yovel and Sheviis are so closely linked, and they're always going to fall at the same, in other words, you're always going to have the Yovel year being a Sheviis year. And so the idea is that, because they're so, closely related, that this is going to be where, this is going to get the characteristics of the other. So over there, where it's saying that you're making a sale, over here in the Sheviis is also going to be where you're having a sale, and it's not going to be by deconsecration. And the idea is that, according to Rabbi Lazar, this brisa is illustrating this rule of the Mishnah, which is going to be a case of repeated sales. And because Sheviis sanctity can be transferred only through sales, that's how it's going to work. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the brisa chose this case for simplicity. And since the brisa had to teach that the first transference of Sheviis sanctity from the original produce to the meat was accomplished through a sale, that the brisa is teaching that subsequent transfers were also accomplished through sales, but that they could be also accomplished through deconsecration. So Rabbi Lazar is looking at this brisa that we said, okay, if one transfers meat with Sheviis produce, and both the meat and the Sheviis produce are subject to the law of Beur in the 7th year, and if he purchased fish with the meat leaves the state of sanctity, and the fish becomes subject to Sheviis sanctity in its place. Okay, that's now a purchase, right? And then it says, for this fourth case, if he purchased the oil with the fish leaves the state of sanctity. The oil enters the place. So that's another transaction. So Rabbi Lazar is saying that, all these cases are done with sale. Rabbi Yochanan would explain it and say, well, the simplest way to understand this complicated idea of transference is going to be with a sale. But he's basically saying that you could also deconsecrate. Now, the first brisa is going to accord with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and a brisa is going to support the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and it was taught, and it says, anyone who has Sheviis money and wishes to deconsecrate them onto his dough may deconsecrate them onto it. And next, there's going to be another brisa that's going to go fit with the opinion of Rabbi Lazar, and a brisa supports the opinion of Rabbi Lazar, for it was taught, one who has a selah of Sheviis money and he wishes to purchase for himself a shirt with it, what should he do? And the idea is that he should go to a storekeeper with whom he is familiar, and he should tell him, give me produce for this. And that's going to be which the storekeeper gives him in exchange for the selah. And he then tells the storekeeper, this produce is given to you as a gift. And the storekeeper tells him, this selah was given to you as a gift. And now he can make a purchase for the shirt with this selah. And this brisa is trying to teach that the transference of sanctity can be accomplished only by way of a purchase, not by way of deconsecration. So, having mentioned a case where it is recommended that somebody give Sheviis money to a storekeeper in exchange for food, the Gemara now is going to talk about these practices of the Amorim who gave Sheviis money to a storekeeper for payment of food. Rabbi Yochanan would drink wine and then give perutos of Sheviis to the storekeeper and pay it. So the question is, was it permitted with him to pay with Sheviis money because it would look like he's creating a debt, and now he's using these Sheviis coins to pay off a debt. You're not allowed to do that. So the Gemara is going to clarify it to explain why Rabbi Yochanan was not misusing that rule. And the Gemara says, thus far we have described an acceptable practice of Rabbi Yochanan, who was absolutely trusted by the storekeeper to pay for the wine that he would drink, and it was therefore as if he paid before drinking. but all other people who are not trusted to the same extent may not drink first and pay later because of the prohibition against paying off the debt with Sheviis money. In other words, the storekeeper effectively had it like it was not a debt and it was already sold. And that it was so trusted that the transaction was not considered a purchase of the wine, and that basically because the wine was drunk, it's no longer existing at the time of the payment, and it would look like it would be considered a payment of debt, and that Rabbi Yochanan incurred a debt, but again, you're not allowed to pay off the debt with coins. But the idea is that he was so trusted that he's basically allowed to drink it first and then take out his Sheviis money to pay for it. That's basically what's happening. So that it wasn't like a normal person that it's like incurring a debt, because the trust is so high that he would give the coins. It was like a transaction that happened right away, even though he didn't take out his coins yet. So there's going to be another practice by the Amorim. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha, relying upon what was said in the name of Rabbi Avina, would show the storekeeper the Sheviis money in one hand and take the cup in the other hand and drink it, and then he would pay for the wine with the money. In other words, he didn't create a debt. He actually was signifying that it's as if it was paid for right away. There's another practice. Rabbi Hizkiah would say to the storekeeper, "Give me wine for the money that is before me," and it was then permitted for him to pay with the money after drinking, even though it was Sheviis money. Because since he said, "Give me wine for the money that is before me," he is like someone who is not paying with Sheviis money, but rather unconsecrated funds. So that's going to be the idea. It's going to be like the money was not intermingled, and the trust was so high, he did not incur a debt. And it should be noted that after receiving the money from Rabbi Hizkiah, the storekeeper could treat the money as unsanctified, since its Sheviis sanctity had already departed. So the storekeepers who sold the wine to Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Acha would have to treat the money they received with Sheviis sanctity, since these Amorim did not affect their redemption. So while it was permitted for those other Amorim to drink first and pay later, since their transactions were considered purchases of wine, these transactions did not affect the transfer of sanctity, because the wine did not exist when the money was paid for, and that's going to be something else. In other words, one came out of existence, and when it comes out of existence, it didn't get the sanctity along with it. And that's one of the nuances here, is that both have to be in existence in order to have this transfer of sanctity. Have a great day.